Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.
Today we have as a guest Tim Marlow, who is the Chief Executive and Director of the Design Museum in London. Formerly you were Director of Exhibitions at the White Cube and then Director at the Royal Academy. We will talk about this institution, but what is interesting for me is to know there is a difference between contemporary art, right, that you have at the White Cube, or art and architecture in general that you have at the Royal Academy, with design, right? Is design an art, is not? And why you were chosen for this museum that is something different from your previous experience? And why do you want to do it, as you have been also in television, in radio, interviewing artists and going to artists' ateliers. I mean, you were very close to the world of art. So is there a difference, or it's the same thing, or how would you describe that?
That's a beautifully put and very clear set of questions that I could only answer in about a 5-hour lecture. But one of the points about being a communicator, which is what I claim to be, or is claimed on my behalf, is that I ought to be able to explain things lucidly. I'll just unpack a little. The thing that unites all of my career to date, and I trained as an art historian and art historian, but the thing that unites it is my growing interest in working collaboratively and working with creative people. I think artists and designers are different. I think art and design is different. I think we can talk later on about the overlaps and the differences. But White Cube, my work there as Director of Exhibitions, was about working with artists and actually helping to get the best artists to make the best shows and to do all the things that commercial galleries do, which are both commercial and career building, because that's commercial in the end. The reason I went to the Royal Academy, which is a private institution, as its artistic director, was because it was and is an organisation that was founded by artists and architects. And even though it does wonderful historical shows, and the shows that I was able to programme and facilitate when I was there, from abstract expressionism to the Renaissance nude to Oceania, but also to an Anthony Gormley show, an Ai Weiwei show, a Marina Abramovich show, a William Kentridge show, all in different ways are part of a creative community that wants to work either with historic art or living art in a way that comes from working with artists. And actually working collaboratively with artists on the shows that they can only make in their lifetime is something that I wanted to bring even to the Design Museum. So the Ai Weiwei show we did last year, which actually was about looking at design through the lens of Ai Weiwei's art, or an Es Devlin project we might look at in the future, or a Tim Burton show that's coming up. It's the excitement of being able to work with living creative individuals and helping them, or facilitating them, or provoking them into making the kinds of projects that can only be made in their lifetime. That's what interests me. But I also think the responsibility of being a curator of historic art or historic design or thematic art shows is also a creative act, and I like to empower curatorial teams or get involved in those as well. So it is multifarious, but the driving motivation for me is working with collaborative
Which is not, it must not be very, very easy, right? To work with Ai Weiwei, who is in China during COVID, to work with Marina Abramovich, who is a personality of some weight, or to create this incredible exhibition of Gormley, with all this art coming down from the ceiling and all that. And somebody else, I think you had Kiefer, it must be a talent to try to drive these kind of people into an exhibition that they approve and you think is good for the public.
I don't know. That's for other people to say if it's a talent. It's a facility, but it's something I want to do. It excites me. Let me tread carefully on this. Some of my best friends or colleagues across the cultural landscape are the most brilliant curators who are authorial, who have a very strong vision of how things need to be done or should be done, and they make wonderful shows. My way of being is to work with experts, is to harness their expertise in the main. I've curated shows on my own, I've authored shows on my own, but I want to work in different ways with different creative people. And so not treating them as if they're dead entities that I'm going to mould is a good starting point. But I think you realise if you work with artists or designers or architects, I mean, it's the old architect's idea that a building can only be as good as the client, that some artists want heavily to be curated. Let's take Anthony Gormley at the Royal Academy. It was such a brilliant project that he enacted. But it was like a provocation. He knows this, that I was saying things like, well, certain other artists have hit these numbers of visitors. If you only want rooms where one person can be in it for 20 minutes to immerse themselves in your work, this is the wrong place. So he gets that. But also, I mean, this is much more profound provocation. It's how we take on those spaces which are historical and wonderful and have had this great lineage of great exhibitions, which is what he wanted to do. How do we take on architectural spaces with architectonic works of art, because it was about what Anthony's work fundamentally is, what it's like to inhabit a human body. And the body forms are the spaces which once were inhabited by a body. So the whole thing starts with the human architecture and expands. And it was a kind of provocation as to how those spaces could be pushed, I mean, physically on occasion, the tonnage, as well as conceptually, as well as the way that works were installed, to an extreme. Marina Abramovich is a woman had never taken on the entire spaces of the Royal Academy in a living monographic stroke solo show. Women had shows there, Elizabeth Frink had, but she didn't take on the whole space. She wasn't given the whole space. This was the starting point for Marina, and the Royal Academy had never done a fully blown performance art exhibition. Now, I also want to say that I left in 2020. That show had been programmed for 3 years. I am not taking credit for the show as it was. The show that it was curated by Andrea Tarsia, my former colleague, a man I have absolute respect and reverence for, and the Royal Academy has delivered that show. But the beginnings of the negotiations, I think, still form the basis of how the show evolved, which was how you let somebody take on those spaces and how you work with them. And they did that brilliantly. One says that sometimes it's the creative personality that drives the relationship, but it's not passive. You don't just say, here's the space, here's the institution, do what you want. It's working out the best way of collaborating. And I have had conflict with artists over that, and there have been projects that haven't worked. But in the main, if you start with the premise that you want to make something extraordinary with an artist and how can we do that, it tends to work, I think.
But then you were nominated, you are the chief executive and director, so you are the boss of this fantastic museum of design, who was conceived at the beginning in 1989, 35 years ago in another place, but then since when, November 2016, moved into this restored building. This was the Commonwealth building at the beginning here in Kensington in London. But then the architect John Powson transformed this building into a very new building with open spaces, interesting corners. He recently opened, for instance, a new cafeteria here, the second floor, which is a design example also because all the furniture, it's a design place. But what we realize, is that design is something closer to people and then art in a way, because everybody affords design somehow, because design is in the tube, design is in the streets, design is everywhere.
What's recording us, how people are listening to us.
Objects that we use every day, from computers to whatever, from motorcycles to cars. So probably there are many more people visiting a design museum than an art museum, right? In a way, no.
I'll tell you why in a minute. But
and anyway, how do you transform this into a museum? I mean, there are obviously bookshops, exhibitions, permanent collections, and so on and so forth. And there are other museums like this one around the world, but this seems to be one of the very important ones. So what did you do since you are here? How did you occupy this space? Did you speak to the architect? What are you doing? I mean, what is your job now? Sorry, first of all, this museum is an independent museum?
Yes,
it's a public museum?
No, it's an independent
museum. It's a private museum?
It's a private museum.
Financed partly by private people?
No, the museum receives a grant of £170,000 a year from the Arts Council that is essentially towards a residency programme. Our turnover is 14 million. We have independent trustees. We were founded by Terence Conran. We have to raise almost all our money, 99% of it, we have to raise, so we're private. My heart and soul, my background is in the art world. I came here because I think that this is the only design museum. It's the National Design Museum. It's just effectively, it's the only design museum. It's the only museum devoted exclusively to the design of the present and the future. There's wonderful overlaps with, my good friend Hans Ulrich Obrist at the Serpentine is doing interesting design projects. The Victoria and Albert Museum does a lot of interesting projects, but it tends to be the design of the past into the present, we're the present into the future. And
you are the present into the future.
Yes. Occasionally looking at the past in a contemporary way, but fundamentally the present into the future. And I think that London, in particular, the United Kingdom, but London has so many great arts institutions, museums, galleries. The private gallery system is incredibly inventive, but design is everywhere, but has no real public prominence and platform. It ought to be the most popular thing possible. The interesting thing is, because design is so varied and so myriad, it's more tribal. So just quickly, when I was at the Royal Academy, if I did an Oceania show, an Anthony Gormley show, a Renaissance nude show, an Impressionist landscape show, there are very different people who would be drawn to those specific exhibitions. But in the main, there's a core audience of friends of the Royal Academy, nearly 100,000 of them, who will come to everything. They'll tell you what they really like and what they don't like, but they believe in both the institution, but more importantly, art with the capital A, as I describe it. Here at the Design Museum, just generally, the overlap between people who are interested in industrial design, graphic design, AI, town planning, architecture, fashion, I don't think is as big. But that's what I'm trying to drive. I want to try and get a core audience amongst the creative communities. But the corollary of that, the opportunity of that, is that we can have the most diverse audiences through the subjects we do, which museums around the country are desperate for. So we're up to pre-COVID levels of visitors, not ticket sales, but of visitors. But our audiences, 50% of them are under 35. When I was at the Royal Academy, 50% of the audiences were over 60. So, both have merit, but so this is interesting.
So what you said at the beginning, that you're looking at the future results
I hope so,
in the public, right?
But the key is, Alain, can I take those audiences with me? Will they come back for every exhibition? That's the hope, that they start to. But if you've come to see...
So you want to create an institution.
I do.
And so that people are part of the institution, whatever you show.
Yeah, I hope so. But I understand realistically that I still may have to develop a museum based on this more fragmented approach. Because if I do a show that looks at Amy Winehouse through the framing of design, or I do a show that looks at Enzo Mari, it may be that the overlap won't work. But I still have to believe, and so that the vision for the museum, broadly what I'm trying to do here, what I've done here, I hope, is energise and give a sense of momentum. Fortunately for your listeners, you don't have to see me. You can see my body language. I sort of speak in an animated way. But that's how I want the institution to be. So John Pawson's vision for here, which was beautifully elegant, which was stripped back. And when you come into the atrium, he wants you to see empty wooden panels, this beautiful, luxurious, phenomenal sense of space. He's perfectly accepting of what I'm now doing. But after 3.5 years, when I was asked to join as director, CEO and director, I said we have to start really animating the space. So when you walked in today, and any visitor walking in now, you will see design projects and activity literally on every floor and every balcony, as well as behind the closed doors of the 2 big suites of exhibition spaces and the learning studio and the auditorium and the library and the research centre. I feel that a building like this has to be a provocation to me, and the public need to understand when they walk in, 1, the energy and momentum of this institution as a kind of hub, and 2, the fact that design can and does occupy everywhere, and it can't just be a beautifully conceived space. And that is a sort of provocative way of working with architecture, but as I say, it's done with respect. But a museum has to have a building that the building is the space in which projects happen, not the space that's revered in and of itself. So that's what we're doing.
But are you now answering to my question, what is the relationship between art and design? Sometimes a work of art is very expensive to buy, and sometimes a lamp or a chair can be also very expensive nowadays if it's signed by a famous designer. I mean, a chair of, let's say, an Italian man like Molino, it's nowadays very expensive, or a piece by Jean Prouvé or something like that, as much as a painting, right? So obviously, a chair, you can sit on the chair, and a sculpture of Gromley, you can only look at it and enjoy its powerful meaning.
Let's take the market out of the equation a little bit. Not that I'm not interested in the market, but people collect many things.
Right.
And people also collect relics. So a signed baseball cap from Shaquille O'Neal is worth as much as a signed print by Anish Kapoor, but that's to do with the market. The fundamental difference between design and art, any attempts to define art tightly or design tightly, I can shatter them within 5 seconds of actually making them. But there are fundamental differences that I think are irrefutable. Art is about human beings, individuals, and those who respond to it, making sense of their or our place in the grand scheme of things. There's many other different kinds of art that ruminate on the nature of what art is itself and so on, but that's fundamental. Design is fundamentally problem solving. So aesthetic considerations, of course, come into play there, but design fundamentally deals with the problems of something. This cup I have in front of me, it has to be usable. It has to look a certain way because of use. The aesthetics also are part of the problem. It has to be appealing. I mean, something needs to look nice as well as be functional. And it's obviously a balance between form and function, aesthetic and its use. But those two differentiations really interest me, because art is seen as elevated because it has no function, and design is seen as lower because it has function. And yet design is also, having been kicked a little from underneath for being merely functional, design and the term designer, certainly in the English language, but I think it's cross-cultural, is seen as luxurious and frippery. So it transcends its function. And that interests me because design is subjected to the kind of paradox of both those, or rather it's almost treated paradoxically. And in a way, the boundary blurring between art and design, or the overlap or the seepage, is interesting. So artists can make objects that are designed, and artists, Oliver Eliasson, Thomas Heatherwick, are not trained as architects, but they also design buildings. It's a really difficult area because architecture is a profession. It's a 7-year course in this country. I understand why a lot of architects are very uneasy about calling Ai Weiwei an architect because he's designed buildings. So it's a professional respect. But actually, Carlo Scarpa, Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, they didn't have full qualifications as architects. So I'm interested not in the status of professional qualification, although I respect it. I am interested in the overlap of these things. I think designers, Hussein Chalayan is a fashion designer who also makes sculpture. Armando Testa, a brilliant Italian advertising man and graphic artist, also made paintings. I'm less interested in rock stars who make paintings, but I like the idea that people with one cultural life, Bob Dylan, has spent 40 years making paintings on the road. And I'm actually genuinely interested in his work, but I'm also aware that, the cult of celebrity, giving anyone who's got celebrity status the same status as an artist who's worked for 40 years and showing them in museums is problematic. But I think that overlap is there. And I think that we make cultural categories because it gives us a sense of clarity. But actually, a lot of creative people are less hung up about those categories. But there is still a difference between a cup that is made for this purpose and a work of art that is a critique or a subversion of a cup. Picasso's absinthe glass is not drinkable out of, but it's a profound rumination on what a glass and a spoon is.
Yeah, and you talked about performing arts of Marina Abramovic, but you also interviewed Gilbert and George, who started much before as performing. They're not cups, right?
And they see themselves still as living sculptures. I asked them this recently. Of course, they say we are living sculptures, yeah.
So they're not cups or fridge.
No,
but what I wanted
unique.
to ask you is this. You talked about present and future, and we talk about design, which seems to be a modern world. But I mean, let's take any example. For instance, Napoleon, right? Napoleon comes to power. He's a general, he's wars and laws and everything, but he invents everything. Fashion, furniture, architecture, and this is called empire, l'Empire, that period. Then there is another one and another one. You know, each king, emperor creates his own, and design, what we call design today, is very important in remembering them.
Yeah, I mean, we call things Victorian. Wouldn't say Queen Victoria invented them, but certainly under the Victorian era, lots of cultural things happened. But it was a long reign, so inevitably it would do, I suppose.
But in other words, design is as old as art in a way, right? Because there are always artists during a reign or an empire, whatever. But in the same time, there is also the whole concept of architecture and design that goes with it. Now, is a fashion designer or a designer of an object an artist still? It's difficult to know.
No, I'll answer that question. As an historian, I am fascinated by the fact that the contemporary or the modernist with a capital M, understanding of design irrefutably goes back to the Industrial Revolution. And design is tied in with manufacture and then mass production. That's the way in the last 200 years we understand design. In some ways that's a new idea. But your point that things in the past were designed is absolutely right. Craft and making and the facility to be able to do things, or the necessity to be able to do things by hand, I think there was a sea change with manufacture, but as Ai Weiwei showed in the exhibition here, the Chinese were producing things on an industrial scale that were handmade. To your point about is a fashion designer an artist? I'd say not. I don't understand why people would see it demeaning a fashion designer or an artist or a furniture designer by saying they're not artists. But do they have the capacity to be artists? Yes. Can they make art? Yes. Do they use some of the language of art? Yes. Are their clothes art? No. And it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Could you make art out of clothing? Yes. But it wouldn't have its function. And I think the overlaps are there. If people want to get very territorial about it, if a fashion designer says to me or proclaims publicly, actually, I am an artist, I'm not going to say, no, you're not. But if you ask me, I think there's a distinction. And I'm slightly suspicious he's putting it maybe too much, but why does it matter if an artist or a fashion designer?
Yeah, because artist sounds a little more important. You know, to feel I am an artist is different than I'm a designer, because one is more like an artisan, considered like an artisan, and the other one is considered like an artist. Now there are cases, take an example of the Lalanne, for instance, who are very successful. Are they artists or are they artisans? Because they make strange objects, but these objects are also tables, chairs, things that can be useful. There is an ambiguity sometimes.
There is, which I think is creative, and I think in that tension it is interesting. And I think it's the Joseph Beuys idea, every man, every human being is an artist. The interesting thing is, for me, the critical thing is what is made and presented by an artist interesting? Does it have something to say beyond the indulgence of the person who's made it, or my doodlings now on this? And that also applies to other objects that are made. So if a chair or something that is initially made for functional reasons actually seems to transcend the function, and we start to revere it or understand it in different ways that start to move towards the idea of art, in a way, it can be art. I mean, we look at religious altarpieces now, and we look at non-Western art, the works of culture that we used to understand very little about, we understand more of, and we see them in the Western concept of art, and we don't really look at the devotional understanding or the ritualistic idea, and we look at cave art without any understanding fundamentally. We can't know much about it, but we see it in terms of art. Picasso famously, and Lascaux, after Lascaux, nothing. But we see that in terms of what we would call now Western art. But it had purpose, and it represented things that we don't understand and things that go well beyond art. So in a sense, it's a category that we've invented that by definition, it's probably more interesting to understand the broader or bigger picture. So in some ways, I've just contradicted what I've said. But again, I think the status anxiety that people have around art is interesting to me sociologically, because it shows that deep down for human beings, the concept of art that we have constructed as human beings matters. It matters to people. That is interesting to me.
It matters so much. Take an example. Saint Laurent is a great fashion designer, but he uses art in some of his collections, right? He refers to works of art. Not always, but sometimes he uses famous artists in his own clothes. Right.
But then Marcel Duchamp used other people's artisanal objects and represented them as art. So I'd say time immemorial, but certainly from the beginning of the 20th century, the mirroring or symbiotic relationship between those two areas has been played with endlessly.
But if we visit this museum in the permanent collection, for instance, we can see how much design has been used either in building. There is a big example of the Beaubourg Museum in Paris. There is the Vespa, there are lamps, and up to the computers, up to the Apple design. I mean, design is, I don't know, I mean, Apple is very useful and very much used, but has design helped this? And plus, it's an object that everyone can have. Right?
I think Johnny Ive is clearly one of the...
But the aesthetics are important.
Yeah, but Johnny Ive is one of the great designers of the past 30 years, and Apple is a kind of testament to that. Its technological functioning and facility go hand in hand, and I mean that literally as I hold my iPhone, hand in hand with great design. And there's a kind of aesthetic thing there as well. But you mentioned our permanent collection, which is just through the wall behind us. And there are many stories. I mean, we're going to rehang in the next 2 years, but we look at it through three ways. Designer, so the people who design them. Maker, so the process of manufacturing. And user. It's three quite intelligent ways. I didn't devise them, so when I say they're intelligent, it's not self-aggrandizing. Designer, maker, user. But there are also moments in the collection hang where the interplay between designers, architects, and artists are there. And we don't flag it too much, but there's a beautiful moment where it's actually talking about good design and bad design, and design for, this is my summary, not in the moral purpose, and design for immoral purpose. So there is the Kalashnikov rifle, which is brilliant design that facilitates horrendous consequences. Next to it is a splint and a prosthetic limb that was designed from the sculptures initially of Charles and Ray Eames. And so the same facility, human ingenuity, problem solving, artistic on one level as well as functional, come together in two designs that showcase, I suppose you could say, the extremities of human life. You know, wanting to kill, wanting to save or prolong or enhance the quality of life. And those moments really interest me rather than just a narrative sequence. I mean, the final wall of our design, of our collections, is not about the revering Apple, although Apple are there. It has a smartphone, which I think it happens to be Apple, right at the middle of a wall, which looks like a kind of extraordinary, wonderful and elaborate diagram. And as you look at it, you realise there are typewriters that come to the centre, different designs of the typewriter. Televisions, calendars, cameras, pens, music equipment from record players, vinyl players to CDs to digital. And they all converge on the centre of this one thing. And this is not the heroicisation of the iPhone, but it's to say all these amazing designs, people like the individual designs, a television that they had, a pen that they had, but everything that those objects do and did for human beings, tell you the time, tell you the date, enable you to write, play music, they're all compressed in this one thing. Now, this doesn't make this better, it's just a condensation, but it's a really interesting wall when you look at, and that's beautiful design, but reductive design.
What is interesting in design is that a bit archaeology in the sense that art is never obsolete, right? Art is what it is. If you see Michelangelo and you see Pistoletto, I mean, they have the same name, they're two very different things, but still they have no timing. Instead, people today, they don't know what a typewriter is for. They don't know what, most people don't use a pen anymore, and so on and so forth. Right? And they're very, and therefore, these are archaeological things. Design is also something that influences us and fashion too, right? In other words, if you go to a hotel that was built 30 or 20 years ago, it seems dusty. Right? Design is moving on very quickly. People change and they don't want anymore. The art is stable in a way. Design is something people are looking for. And once they like a kind of thing, they want to change to that.
I'm not sure I agree. I agree with you broadly in certain ways. I think it's technology that becomes obsolescent. I think that some designs do, but I think it's also to do with taste, fashion. So actually, even in the world of fashion, clothes from the 1960s designed by Pucci are more fashionable now than they even were 2 years after they were made. You know, furniture, mid-century modernism is now so sought after. And I think that what post-modernity still means in this kind of amorphousness is that taste is more pluralistic. And I don't think design per se is obsolete in the same way that, I think you're right about the potential timelessness of art. It doesn't become obsolete. But art definitely falls in and out of fashion. And there are artists now that are either forgotten or cancelled, and so I think it is a kind of complicated melting pot. But I think your word obsolescence is really interesting, because art never becomes obsolescent.
No, it can be out of fashion, but it's not obsolete. Whereas, people nowadays, they don't want old masters, for instance, right? Unless they are 3 or 4 huge masterpieces, but it may come back.
Yeah. Whereas my phone eventually will become obsolescent, but the design of phones there may be a retro use of this design in 10 years' time where it actually comes back.
Yeah, but what is fascinating also in design is that we don't know where it is going to be, right?
We don't know where art's going there, do we either? But we do know that technology will inform art in more ways than some people acknowledge, because a lot of the breakthroughs in the history of art have been technologically inspired. The invention of photography, the invention of the portable paint pot so that the Impressionists or the Barbizon school could go out into the landscape and paint more easily. But we know for certain that design and technology are symbiotically linked. And design is absolutely tied, harnessed, enslaved by, or facilitated by technological development in a way that art isn't.
And also industrial, right? Because you don't do industrial art. It's not very industrial, right? You can have multiples, but there are still some. Instead, you can have millions of telephones, and so it's easy to have it. Everybody can, or most people can afford design. So how do you organize your museum? You have been very involved in the previous jobs and creating exhibitions and all that. What is your main activity here? What is
you mean my day-to-day as director?
Yeah, and also what is your goal? What is your aim?
Okay. Well, the boring aspect, which is essential, is that I have to try and raise funds. I think a lot of museum directors, most of us didn't come into museums to be fundraisers, but we have to do it, and it's getting more and more essential. But let's park that. I want to try and create a literal, a physical space, as well as a metaphorical space, in which my curatorial team and my staff can work externally with all manner of interesting people to do projects. We do have a kind of a framework of the kinds of projects we want to make, but we also want to be a museum where we don't always author everything and say, this is the museum's position, come and see it. We tell you how the world is. We also want to be a place where people approach us with ideas and we can respond to and sometimes work with those ideas. Now, that's not me saying, anyone listening to this podcast, write in with an exhibition idea. I really don't mean that. But I mean the creative possibilities of being open to those. The most important thing that we're doing here, that we have managed to achieve in the last year and a half, and this does actually fit into what I do day to day, because I want a museum with purpose. And part of the purpose of any museum is to engage with the public. And I need the public to come, different kinds of people, to see what we're doing, not just to fund it, not just to sort of support it, but because I believe in what we're actually showing here, what we're staging here, what we're creating here. But we have this thing now called Future Observatory, which we do have significant funding for. It's not for the museum, it's for us to distribute. So we've become the National Centre for Design Research for the Green Transition. And what we have on the top floor and the balcony are a series of projects that showcase early research in this regard. But we are literally working with postgraduate research departments, different parts of industry, to look at projects and to facilitate and commission design research for all sorts of things that can help going forward with the green transition. So we've already funded a project off the coast of Northern Ireland, in an island there, where they're looking at a whole process of treating sewage, which, if it works in the next 3 years, can then be wheeled out in different parts of, say, the United Kingdom or the world. We've got a project in Scotland with 2 universities and their postgraduate research departments looking at, over 3 years, how we remove all single-use plastic in the Scottish National Health Service. If that happens, that can be wheeled out elsewhere. We can't exhibit this at the moment, and we're being relatively quiet about it. I mean, it's not a secret, I'm telling you. But on the balcony outside, we've showcased a garment from a brilliant organisation called Faber Futures, which is made of material that is microbe dyed. So there is little or no water used in the creation of that fabric. So that's already now going to go into fashion production. Not mass production, but fashion production. That is a genuine transformative approach to the problems of tens of thousands of gallons of water to dye fabric to make clothes out of. There's a mycelium arch in the corner of the building that looks like a great sculpture that in fact is from an architectural practice in the northeast of England where it can structurally hold, it's a structure, so you could build a room or a pavilion out of it already. Mycelium can be used, we know, as insulation. It will be structurally on the outside of buildings soon. In 20 years' time, that structure hints at the idea that people think genuinely you can grow part of your own building. So these are longer-term projects, and in the case of the microbe-dyed material, short-term projects that genuinely can start to have impact. And the public seeing these and understanding what's going on and spreading the word is one part of this. But actually, as we're trying to do, and we get through our symposia and the way we're starting to disseminate it, we're not making a noise at the moment. It'll be in 2 or 3 years' time when there's critical mass. These are the results. We want policymakers, politicians, venture capitalists, brands, industry to see these things and say, yeah, we want to put these into production or we want to work with these people. So I believe that museums, when they talk about transformation, it's genuine, it's authentic, and you transform people's view of the world through art or the experience of a museum by making them see things differently. I believe in that. But I also know that we here are genuinely trying and have an opportunity to be much more transformative in a much broader way, politically, sociologically, environmentally. But we're not, telling the world, we've launched this thing, we're going to change the world. There's too much of that that's going on at the moment. We just want to get on with commissioning this, letting designers, design researchers, and all manner of scientists, technologists, get on with this research and try and facilitate these projects and see if we can make them happen. If they're workable, if they're efficacious, we can then explain to the world this has happened and get them out there. And that really excites me. That's the real core of the vision here.
And the UK are important in the world of design. Are the UK one of the most interesting and important poles, or you are showing design from all over the world? I mean, this is more an international museum or it's more a British museum? I mean, it is a British museum, of course. Plus, the world nowadays, even in art, is spread out from Africa to Asia, from South America. The exhibition in museums, in galleries have changed.
We are the National Centre for Design Research for the Green Transition, and I would like eventually for us to be properly recognised with funding as the National Design Museum. And the projects I've just talked to you about are funded by a national research board, the UKRI.
So you're trying to sponsor, to improve and to show what is done in the UK.
And what I want to do is to say that we start by leveraging funding and support and the network in the United Kingdom to get on with those projects. But already we're talking about how we tour and share those ideas internationally. But in the programme that we are programming here in our exhibitions and in the designers that we show in the museum, it is emphatically and irrefutably international. I am not interested in a nationalistic approach to design. It's utterly spurious. I think the United Kingdom has been interesting in design. I think in some ways, in the culture that I operate, which is the United Kingdom, design is underrated even though we're good at it. Whether or not we're the most important in the world, that kind of jingoism doesn't interest me. I think what's going on here interests me, but I don't travel the world all the time. I think what goes on in Italy or France or Germany or America or Korea or Australia, there's many interesting things happening, and actually being linked up and sharing is probably an important thing. I think you're absolutely right that design in particular transcends those boundaries. I mean, art is international, but a lot of art is kind of interestingly predicated around identity issues for individuals or groups or cultures or whatever. I mean, that's part of the way the world is now. We've become much more sensitive to and engaged with individual and collective identities. I think design obviously has some reflection of that, but design really does have a universalism, and its specificity of emerging from certain cultures is quite interesting, but it's not really its point, I think.
It is important for you, the number of visitors, and you said at the beginning that they're mostly young people.
Over half. Numbers matter. I mean, there isn't much point having a museum where no one comes. We're up to nearly 700,000, which is pre-650,000.
They pay to come here, or it's free?
They're visitors. They're the total number of visitors.
And for the exhibition?
And the exhibition ticketing, we're about 250,000, 300,000 paid. So the number of visitors coming to the museum, many of my colleagues in other museums are not near pre-COVID levels, but we've done many things to encourage people on a free offer to come to the museum. So it's not to say we're better or more successful than other institutions. It's just heartening to know we're pretty close to the pre-COVID levels. My challenge is to go more, but it's also to increase the numbers of people who are paying tickets for our exhibitions. But there's other ways of also engaging audiences. If, they can use our cafe, they can use our shops, they can support us in different ways. So we're moving absolutely in the right direction. And it is to do with the quality of people's visit that ultimately matters. You don't just want to be a mass attraction who pile past to see the Mona Lisa and nothing else. You can only engage with people in meaningful ways if you get them to come. So that's why numbers matter. And I think for people, philanthropists, corporate sponsors and others, they want to know they're supporting something that's gaining momentum.
Well.
And that's reasonable.
There is another thing, which is designers all over the world, they would like to show here. I mean, do you have many requests? Is it a challenge to be here, to show here?
Yes, I think so. And I think people understand the limits of our capacity to programme. I mean, I've said I want to work creatively with designers and creative people, and that's often monographically on projects. But I think with shows, we did a show called Wastage, where we looked at the whole idea about design's responsibilities and the potential for design to help us, work through the current environmental and the ongoing environmental crisis. We're doing another show next year looking at design from a natural perspective. There's different ways of working with designers in group shows as well as individually. And I'm not saying that every designer in the world's banging on our door to show here, but more and more people want to work with us, and I want to find ways of working as collaboratively and as creatively as possible with those communities, without a doubt,
What comes out from this conversation ultimately is that design is not valetarian, it's not something for wealthy people or just superficial. Design is something that is very much part of our lives.
I agree. But I think luxury, that's a topic.
It is not necessarily luxury.
No, but that's another conversation, which is that some of the most beautiful things made, that wonderful show Luxury in Abu Dhabi, things that are made with love and care, and actually they're incredibly intricate things to make, are in some ways much more sustainable. They last for a long, long time, rather than the throwaway cheap culture that is seen to be more democratic. I mean, Aston Martin cars, the designer of that, the creative officer, it's only about 8 years ago they reached the 100,000th car, whereas Ford are producing however many million a year. But do you know what percentage of Aston Martins that have ever been made are still in existence? They estimate about 98% of them. So you kind of think, well, that's not a bad... I mean, actually high-end, well-designed, well-made products do often have a lifespan. It's like good furniture, isn't it? It's like even good clothes.
Yeah, but design is a window of a country, of a city, You immediately perceive if a place is growing or if a place is plunging.
That's true as well. You're right. You can see the fabric of something, because design is how the city's organised or planned. It's in the quality of the buildings. It's in the detail of the place. And then it's in the kind of ways in which the citizens are, what they drive, how they dress.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.